to see you again today. I am easily distracted. It's not like I can't help myself. I could be in the middle of writing an article and someone begins to talk outside of my office and I hear what they're saying. And then someone else can speak in another conversation and I hear them as well. And that's three things circling around in my scattered brain. I don't try to hear them. I just do. And what's more, I can't make myself not hear them. I can close the door, I can turn on some white noise, but they're still there. Now eventually they diminish, and the area is quiet, and I can continue my writing. Now I work best in an interruption-free, distraction-free environment. My new role with Johnson University provides me with an office in the best possible place, that is other than in my house when my wife is not there. But I'm assigned to a 53-foot long construction trailer, and my office is in one end, and the only other person in that trailer has an office in the opposite end. I close the door, the hum of the heater provides the distraction-free environment that I need to be productive. And the location of the trailer on the campus, which few people know it's there, and the fact that few people know my office is in that trailer lets me be interruption-free as well. Can you relate? No. Or do you know anyone like me? Or am I out of it, as some people have suggested? Now, in our scripture passage this morning, Jesus is both interrupted and distracted. And so I ask you to listen for that as I read for you Mark chapter 5, verses 21 to 43. And I'm going to read from the International Standard Version. When Jesus again had crossed to the other side in a boat, a large crowd gathered around him by the seashore. Then a synagogue leader named Jairus arrived. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and begged him urgently, saying, "My little daughter is dying. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be well and live." So Jesus went with him. And a huge crowd kept following him and jostling him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from chronic bleeding for 12 years. Although she had endured a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all of her money, she'd not been helped. In fact, she grew worse. Since she'd heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his robe, because she'd been saying to herself, "If I can just touch his robe, I will get well." Her bleeding stopped at once, and she felt in her body that she was healed from her illness. Immediately, Jesus became aware that power had gone out from him. So he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched me?" His disciples asked him, "You see the crowd jostling you, and yet you ask, 'Who touched you?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see the woman who had done this. What had happened to her? Well, she came forward, fell down trembling in front of him, and told him the whole truth. And he told her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed from your illness." Now, while he was still speaking, some people came from the synagogue leader's home and said to him, "Your daughter has died. You don't need to bother the teacher any longer." But when Jesus heard what they said, he told the synagogue leader, "Stop being afraid. Just keep on believing." Jesus allowed no one to go further with him except Peter, James, and John. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw mass confusion People were crying and sobbing loudly and entered the house with them. "Why all this confusion and crying?" he asked. "The child isn't dead. She's sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when he had driven them all outside, he took the child's father and mother along with the men who were with him and went into the room where the child was. And he took her by the hand and said to her in Aramaic, "Young lady, get up." And the young lady got up at once and started to walk about. She was 12 years old. Instantly, they were overcome with astonishment. But Jesus strictly ordered them not to let anyone know about this. And he also told them to give her something to eat. Now, we have two stories in this passage. Actually, one comes in the middle of another. It's called a Markan sandwich. Mark the author, Markan sandwich, or a story within a story. I know that doesn't sound very scholarly, but that's what it is. It's a sandwich. And in this sandwich, two people need Jesus, each in a special way. Jesus, or Jairus, approached Jesus as a man on a mission. His little girl was about to die, and he was not ready to let that happen. His approach was a desperate one. Right away we notice three attitudes: selflessness, humbleness, and pleading. Now I have an idea that had this been Jairus' personal need, he may have never given Jesus a second thought. But because his daughter was near her last gasp for breath, Jairus threw his pride and his self-reliance and his high position out the window. Jairus was a synagogue ruler, and as such, one of the most respected men in the community. His role was similar to, but more powerful than, the chairman of the elders in congregations within our faith family. A synagogue ruler was the administrative head. He was the president of the board of elders who were responsible for the good management of the synagogue. A synagogue ruler was not a worship leader, or a professionally trained scribe, or a rabbi. He was a lay member, entrusted by the elders of the community with the general oversight of the synagogue. So Jairus selected the readers, the prayers, and the teachers. He examined the discourse of the public speakers, and he made certain that everything was done decently and in accordance with ancestral tradition. For Jairus to be seen asking Jesus to come to his house for any reason could be disastrous. But he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about his dying daughter. His attitude was selfless. Now, I can imagine Jairus pushing his way through the crowd, his eyes straining as they dart from face to face throughout the crowd, looking for a glimpse of Jesus. And frantically, his steps quicken until finally he's standing face to face with the one, the only one whom he believes can help his little girl. And Jairus collapses at the feet of Jesus, declaring the superiority of Jesus over his life. Now, in that posture, before Jesus of Nazareth, Jairus risks all he has, whom he is, for the sake of his little girl. One can be no more. This selfless, humble man then begged Jesus to come home with him. Any dignified Jewish man would not be caught in public begging or begging for help, most certainly not begging from Jesus. But from a heap of humanity at the feet of Jesus, Jairus begs Jesus to save his daughter and let her live. And Jesus immediately went with Jairus towards him. En route to Jairus' home, with no time to spare, Jesus is interrupted. An interruption with catastrophic results. Little did Jairus know that, as he pushed his way through the crowd, there was also a woman pushing her way through the crowd who needed Jesus just as much as Jairus did. The woman's desperation was quieter, but scarcely less urgent. This unnamed woman had a uterine hemorrhage for 12 years. She had tried many doctors, and her condition worsened rather than improved. And now she was destitute, having spent every bit of money she had. And her condition made her permanently and ritually unclean. She could not touch or be touched by anyone. Her illness left her personally, socially, and spiritually cut off. She could not go to temple. She could not even receive a comforting hug or a sympathetic touch from a friend. Now, the Talmud lists 11 cures for this kind of disease. There were various tonics and astringents. She tried them all to no avail. One cure was to carry around the ashes of an ostrich egg in a linen rag in summer or a cotton rag in winter. She tried them all to no avail. Another was to carry a barley sprout which had been found in the dung of a white female donkey. She tried them all to no avail. Verse 27 indicates that when she heard about Jesus, in desperation, as a last resort, she approached him. She hadn't learned of Jesus previously. She hadn't been reminded of Jesus when he set foot on the land on the east side of Lake Galilee. She heard of Jesus for the first time. And the original language that's used is the term the Jesus, which is a way that Jesus was referred to separate him from all other Jesuses or Yeshuas in that day. Her thought was to approach Jesus from behind, using the crowd as cover. Remember now, she could not touch anyone or be touched by anyone. She needed to move in and out invisibly as possible. So as she approached Jesus, she was, Scripture says, continually saying to herself, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. If I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. If I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. And she was right. She reached in and touched his clothes and was completely healed, and she knew it. She could feel it. In one touch, she was rendered whole, her impurity removed, her societal status restored. The truth is that what she, in her weak, shallow faith, believed would happen, happened. She kept on saying, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Not, if I just touch his clothes, I might be healed. Then the unexpected happened. Jesus felt something go out from him, and he stopped, and he turned to the crowd and asked, who touched me? You see, there was nothing magical in Jesus' garment, but there was saving power in the unnamed woman's faith. And Jesus wanted to use her active faith as a teaching opportunity. I wonder what Jairus was thinking about now. The 12 disciples thought Jesus' question to be quite ridiculous, since he was continuously jostled forward and back and from side to side by the crowd of people wanting to be close and wanting to touch him. But the touch of this unnamed woman was different. Jesus knew it, and he looked for it in the crowd. Fear, not boldness, provoked the woman to come forward this time. Yet she presented herself to him to reveal the whole truth. She could have escaped with her healing intact. She didn't have to return. But she apparently understood the intense look of Jesus. The woman, knowing what had happened to her was miraculous, came to Jesus, fell at his feet, and told him the whole story. And Jesus called her daughter and announced it was her faith that healed her, not his garden, and that her healing would be continuous, and he sent her away in peace. How many members of that crowd must have felt skittish after hearing the truth that her vaginal bleeding self had come in contact with so many of them before she was healed. Now notice with me. Jesus didn't make a decision to heal this woman. God did. The power residing in and issuing from Jesus is the personal power of the personal God. Now, while Jesus was dealing with this interruption, men coming from Jairus' household distracted him. See, I'm not the only one. They came to inform Jairus that his daughter was now dead. So he didn't need to trouble Jesus any longer. Jesus delayed to interrogate this woman, and the news of his daughter's death assaulted Jairus' faith. Jesus, distracted, overheard, and chose to ignore what the men said. He shifted Jairus' focus from his daughter's death to Jesus himself. It was almost like he was saying, "Now, Jairus, look at me. Look at me. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Just believe." Believe in what? Well, believe the kind of faith that had led him to the healer in the first place. Jesus was saying, don't lose sight of that. Don't let loose of that. Trust Jesus despite everything to the contrary. Now, I imagine the synagogue leader's thoughts were quite different now than they would have been were it not for the woman interrupting Jesus. His thoughts may have changed from, "I found Jesus, my daughter's going to be all right, we just have to get there as quickly as possible," and then changed to, "Why is he coming? What can he do now?" See, there's a big difference between believing in Jesus' ability to heal and believing in his ability to raise the dead. I don't know that raising the dead even crossed Jairus' mind. When Jairus, Jesus, Peter, James, and John approached Jairus' home, Mourners had already begun the traditional wailing and dances which alerted the community of a death and indicated the depth of love for the deceased. Jesus stepped into the midst of the mourners, asked what all the commotion was about. I mean, culturally, he would already know somebody had died. Asked what all the commotion was about, announced that the little girl wasn't dead, parenthetically, to stay dead, gets jeered and laughed at by the mourners, and turns around and kicks them all out of the house. Do you think the Father's silence, or by his silence, that he may have taken some delight in the mocking Jesus received? Jesus didn't have to stop just because a woman got healed when she touched his garment. He could have walked on. This wasn't Jesus' first miracle, for crying out loud. But now, in the quiet, Jesus took the mother and father and the 3 disciples into the room where the little girl's body lay. And in their presence, he took the little girl's cold hand and said, "Young lady, get up." And immediately she got up and walked around, and they were all astonished. Now, the Greek word used can be translated astonished with great astonishment, or it can be overcome with amazement, or the one I like best, removed from their senses. They were blown away by what had just experienced. And before Jesus left the room, he said to the parents, "Now, don't tell anyone." Now, we know what that did. See, that didn't mean not to tell anyone that their daughter was alive, because the very people who had seen her dead were going to see her alive and walking about. But it could mean that he didn't want the parents to reveal the intimate details. Like, what hand did Jesus use? Or what kind? What hand did he hold? How did he hold it? What language did he speak in? Did he speak loudly or softly by those charlatans who might try to become those who raise the dead themselves? And thus, the market sandwich ends. The Jesus in these 2 narratives emerges as one who is compassionate in the face of human suffering, and who makes the needs of sufferers his norm of action, to the disregard of social taboos and conventions. There were many in the crowd that day who bumped into Jesus, but only 2 who touched him. Many came gawking, but 2 came searching for an experience like they had never known before. Jesus' ministry is full of interruptions. Everything we read about seems to happen when he's on his way to somewhere. He was on his way somewhere else when he saw Zacchaeus in the tree and made plans to eat dinner with him that evening. He was eating with friends when a woman anointed his feet with perfume. He was hanging out at a wedding when Mary, his mother, asked him to change water into wine. He was in the middle of teaching when a man was lowered on a cot through the roof to be healed. He was on his way to heal a sick girl when he was interrupted by a woman he would heal. Now, having shown that he is Lord over nature, in the waves, Lord over the cosmos, the ordered society in rebellion against God, he in this Markan sandwich shows he is Lord over sickness and disease and Lord over death. Who has such divine power? Oddly enough, it was the demoniac who gives us the answer. The Son of the Most High God. Mark emphasizes the importance of faith. Faith based on the greatness of the one in whom we are to have faith. This Jesus is worthy of our faith, for he is Lord over nature, Lord over demons, Lord over illness, and Lord over death. And when confronted by these things and others, what we need to do is not fear, but have faith. You see, fear was named as faithless. When confronted with the difficulties in life, we need someone to look us in the eyes and say, now look at me. Look at me. Don't be afraid. Stay faithful. We need to do the same for each other. Look at me. Don't be afraid. Keep on believing. It makes no difference how serious or not the circumstances may be. Someone soon needs to step up to us and say, don't be afraid. Only believe. You see, Jesus' distraction didn't alter the outcome. Let's pray. Father God, we celebrate your greatness, your power, your wonder, your love. I pray, God, that you will always remind us not to be fearful, but to trust you in all